discussion, we have with us Mr. Naor Gilon, Ambassador of Israel to India, Sri Lanka, and Bhutan. Please, sir, join us. Mr. Kunihiko Kawazu, Chargé Affair ad interim of Japan to India, Deputy Chief of Mission, Embassy of Japan. Please join us. And Ms. Sarah Storey, Deputy High Commissioner, Australian High Commission, India. Please join us, ma'am. This discussion will be moderated by Mr. Sandeep Unnithan. I request him to please take over from here.
Eager beaver. Thank you, Priya. Welcome, gentlemen and ladies. And Ambassador Gilon, so good to see you here. You know, when I was in Tel Aviv about 15 years ago, a very important government official there told us that when Israelis wake up and look east, the first democracy that they see is India. How has that relationship changed in the last few years, and what do you see as the future of the India-Israel relationship?
Thank you very much for having me, first of all. I think that, you know, the start between India and Israel wasn't that good. India didn't support the establishment of Israel or the UN resolution at the time. And over the years, there were very cold relations. But in 1992, we established our full diplomatic relations. And now we are celebrating 30 years. And I think that in the last, from probably 2017, the visit of Prime Minister Modi to Israel, and then the year later, the visit of Prime Minister Netanyahu, reciprocal visit here, the relations picked up. We defined then the relations as a strategic partnership. But, you know, names are important, but more important is content. I believe that we are also in content very, very intimate. If in the beginning of our relations, we were based mainly on security cooperation, defense cooperation, and on agricultural cooperation, where Israel has today 29 centers of excellence, and I think that about 2 million Indians, farmers went through them. Today, in the last 5-6 years, the relations have developed. There are a vast array of fields, all fields of cooperation. There is no limit. So we really have wonderful cooperation, great relations between the leaders, even when government changed in Israel in the meantime. And I think this is a strong basis for future to further build on our relations.
Thank you. Ms. Storey, welcome to the Global Summit. So good to see you here.
Thank you.
Taking off from what Ambassador Gilon just told us, when Indians look to the southeast, they see cricket and curry in Australia. How has that relationship changed?
Well, thanks, Sandeep. I'm very happy to say that we have diversified beyond these two images. We've become known now for the 4 Ds, which is democracy, dosti, diaspora, and defense.
Democracy, diaspora, defense, and
Yes.
dosti.
Yes.
Oh, perfect. So that's
Yes.
3 C's have become 4 D's.
That's right. We're constantly evolving.
Right. That's amazing. So where is there going to be an E, or are you going to build on the D's itself?
I think we've got plenty to work on with the agenda of Ds. Like Israel, we have a comprehensive strategic partnership with India, and our relations are at a significant high, and we're very pleased about that. We have a very active and practical agenda across the gamut of our endeavours. Everything from a trade and economic agreement, which is going through our ratification process, to greater coordination on defence and security, great links through education, including looking into India's national education policy and looking at twinning universities and joint degrees. We're going to open up another consulate So we'll have many consulates here, not quite as many centres of excellence, but we will open one in Bengaluru on critical and emerging technology policy. But the relationship is thriving, and the important thing to note is that there is really no finish line on bilateral relations. We just want to continue to create more proximity, more cooperation and partnership, whether bilaterally in the region through the Quad, or just in any way we can.
Thank you. Kunihiko-san, when India looks east, like really east, far east, it sees a partner and friend and a country that we've been linked with almost umbilically for over 1,000 years. That's Japan. Now, you know, we had a very interesting session just before this on the dragon in the room, right? And both India and Japan today are almost united by a common fear of that dragon in the room. And you know which country I'm talking about. Do you see the proximity between India and Japan being accelerated by this mutual fear of this third country?
Thank you very much. Thank you for very interesting question. First of all, I feel very honored to be a part of this very interesting panel. To your question, first of all, I will say Indo-Japan bilateral relations is too important, too precious, too strong, too destined for strong bond to be dependent on one specific third country. So you mentioned the thousands of our histories back to Buddhism. Also, after the World War II, Judge Par was helped us a lot. Also, India was the country which concluded the bilateral peace treaty with us, through which we could come back to the international arena. So I don't like to characterize our bilateral relations, which is meant for one specific country. So looking at the economic side, we have our own flagship bullet train project, Maharashtra Hyderabad high-speed rail. This is developing now. When our Prime Minister Kishida paid an official visit to India in March this year, both leaders, Prime Minister Modi and our Prime Minister, agreed upon one shared goal of investment from Japan to India of 5 trillion yen in coming 5 years. This 5 trillion yen is equivalent to, say, about 3.2 lakh crore Indian rupees. So this economic side is, for both sides, very, very mutually beneficial, I think. So my Australian colleague Sarah mentioned the Quad meeting. The last month, May, Prime Minister Modi participated in this the Japan, US, Australia, India leaders meeting, which is dubbed as the Quad leaders meeting. We had a bilateral the leaders meeting there in Tokyo too. So meaning taking into account the visit of our Prime Minister to India in March, in these 2 months, 2 times the leaders meeting. And also this year marks the 70th anniversary of the diplomatic relations between 2 countries. So for our cooperation, sky is the limit. Thank you.
Sky is the limit. That's an interesting phrase. Ambassador Gilon, we've all heard of the band U2. It's very popular, especially among my generation now. But in the last couple of days, I've been seeing a new uh, expression in the newspapers. I too, you too. What does that mean? Can you tell us what it stands for?
Yeah, of course, the two I's are India and Israel. The two U's are UAE and the USA. It's another regional initiative. I think that you see more and more regional initiative, and this is probably a consequence of the fact that the traditional international organization arena is not serving anymore the world and the region. And the feeling is that we are coming back to a Cold War state situation where the UN, the Security Council, is blocked because they are their members that will do the opposite of the other regardless of the topic, just for the sake of being on the other side, and this is not a good thing. And the alternative is creating smaller and different groups, like Quad here was discussed, and I2U2, which in general the idea is the big definition is cooperation and infrastructure. But you take like-minded countries in the same region with same interest, and I think what is common to all the three players from the region and to the US, that these are three governments that wish to improve the lives of their people, not to make the lives of other people worse. Because there are two kind of leaderships, as I see in the world. People leaders who try to make the lives of their own population better, and those who are looking to make the region less stable and less comfortable for others. So I think this is in common. The idea here is not against any one of the I2U2. The idea is to cooperate together. The wide definition is infrastructure. And I think that it will bring benefit to all, to the region instability, to the people, to the governments, and I think it's a win-win formula, and I can't wait to see the summit that is the virtual summit that is supposed to happen next month when President Biden comes to the region, and from Israel, they are supposed to have this virtual summit, and I hope they will announce already some projects which private sector will execute, and we start going forward with this beautiful initiative.
Great. And it's interesting you should mention that these small regional initiatives are taking taking a lot of slack from where bigger organizations seem to have failed. And the Quad is one such example. And two diplomats here on the stage are part from the Quad countries. That's Australia, Japan, India, and the United States. Ms. Storey, I want to ask you about the way you see India's stance in the United Nations, especially when the Russia issue came up to vote. The fact is that we were neutral when Australia was very firmly in the Western side, just to condemn Russia for the invasion of Ukraine. Do you see our stance of neutrality as running counter to the spirit of the Quad?
Thank you, Sandeep. That's an excellent question, and it's one that I am asked often, in fact, as are many Australians in India. I would say not at all. Australia's position on the situation in Ukraine is very clear. We oppose absolutely Russia's immoral and illegal actions, but we respect absolutely that each country makes its own foreign policy. This is one of the inherent principles of sovereignty, and the groupings that have been mentioned, the Quad and this other excellent initiative, they are based around mutual respect. And Australia's position on India in Ukraine has also been very clear and consistent. We understand that each country has its own interests, and that India has put its position very clearly about wanting to keep all avenues open to search for solutions in a constructive manner. That is also in accordance with India's own national interests. All friends do not have to agree on every single issue, and the key thing to note is that we do not focus on these differences, but rather on practical and positive outcomes and endeavours to, most of all, ensure that the situation in Ukraine does not detract attention from where it needs to be. And where that attention needs to be is to ensure that in the Indo-Pacific, a region which is at the heart and the engine economically of the world going forward, that it is a region that is stable, peaceful and prosperous, where we are not subject to coercion and the rights of all states to operate peacefully is able to be exercised. Thank you.
Friends can have differences. Kunihiko-san, do you agree with that? And how do you see India's role in the Quad? Do you see the Quad, for instance, becoming something like what they say an Asian NATO? That is a group of democracies which have a common threat, united by the fear of a fifth country. Do you see this actually happening, an Asian NATO as they make it out to be, the Quad?
Thank you very much. I believe this question is also the quite frequent one which I am facing here in Delhi. So let me tackle with this, so to say, Asian NATO allegation. I feel a sort of specific intention here if he or she mentions or try to characterize Quad as an Asian NATO. Quad, Japan, US, Australia, India. Sarah, my Australian dear colleague, also indicated this is a cooperation framework, not only for the political affairs, but also the economic affairs, scientific affairs, cultural affairs, including every sphere. And also NATO, as many people know, this is a joint defense mechanism building upon the, so to say, collective defense rights stipulated in the UN Charter. Quad is not such a character. So this is simply the cooperation mechanism among the like-minded partners. And I believe that the last month's leaders meeting brought about the so many concrete, tangible outcomes which are highly appreciated from my viewpoint. And in this context, the Indians' role is significant. Today's theme, Vishwa Guru, was mentioned, I believe. I think that as a Vishwa Guru, the India has played a significant role in this Quad format too. To name a few, for example, the vaccine supply. Supply of vaccines produced in India to the ASEAN countries like Thailand, Cambodia. This was the remarkable development in the process of Quad, I believe. Also, the one Indian the pharmaceutical company is trying to increase the production of Johnson & Johnson vaccines under the auspices, under the name of Quad. This is also the India's big contribution. I think that for the infrastructure building, for the new and significant technologies such as 5G, the maritime sphere, the Indians' role is remarkable, which should be admired a lot. Thank you.
So before I go on to my next question, how many fans of Fauda over here? Oh, right. That's like 50%. of the audience. There you go. So Ambassador Gilon has played a very important role in getting some of the key cast members of FODA here. So he understands the value of soft power and hard power. So Ambassador Gilon, bringing me to this point of strategic partnership, the hard power aspect, the military aspect. Israel has been a very large defense partner for India in the last 30 years. You've been one of our top 5 arms suppliers, some very key cutting edge equipment that we can talk about and some that we can't talk about. So now you have the government of India launching an Atmanirbhar drive, right, for self-sufficiency in defense equipment. And do you see this as running counter to, do you see Atmanirbhar Bharat running counter to the Indo-Israeli arms hardware purchase relationship?
Thank you. No, not at all. On the contrary, I think that first of all, it's the right approach to take by India in the sense that we see what's happening now with Ukraine. India, 70% of its defense forces equipment are based on Russian equipment, and now there is an issue of spare parts. So I think that self-sufficiency, especially when the country is growing, technology is getting stronger, the economy is getting stronger is a clear direction country aspiring to be not only a regional superpower, but a world superpower should take. So I totally support this direction. I think it's the right direction. There will be a time of gap, technological gap, because you are trying now to gap, 20 years of research of other countries. So you'll have to find a way how you gap this time and technological differences. When it comes to Israel, I think that we hopefully we understand the approach, we support the approach. We hopefully will have even some kind of an advantage here, because we are a smaller industry as a country and more agile, and we can adapt ourselves to the partner. I think that the very deep trust between India and Israel enable us, because in defense we have to understand that IP, you can lose IP in civilian uses, and it's a loss of money. When you lose IPs in defense, and especially for a country like Israel, that our defense systems are developed for Israel. They are not developed in order to sell them abroad. Selling abroad is an unfortunate need because we cannot afford the systems, the R&D, to pay for the R&D ourselves. So we have to sell it, and it's critical for us. But we feel intimacy and closeness with India to share without fear that it will reach third parties which we like less. So I think that at the long term, it will give Israel even an opportunity, Israel and India, to cooperate more, because I think that some of the big industries will find it very hard to release their IPs, to be agile enough to manufacture big parts of the systems here.
Ms. Storey, I never thought I'd see a time when India and Australia would be so close, not just in cricket or in the diaspora, the 4Ds and the 3Cs that you mentioned. I never thought that defense relationship between India and Australia would be so close. And now there's talk of basing of Indian platforms on Australian soil, and do you see this actually happening, the close relationship that the two countries share? Do you see that as moving to another level now in terms of, basing by basing, I mean Indian platforms operating on Australian soil and Australian platforms operating in Indian waters and Indian bases and ports? Do you see that as the next level in our defense relationship?
Thanks, Sandeep. Without doubt, the defence relationship is also reaching new heights. It is really extraordinary to consider how far we've come in just a few years. The appetite and alignment of our interests is very noticeable. India, without doubt, is a top-tier defence partner for Australia. We are building our cooperation, and we're looking to build greater complexity in our arrangements and in our exercises. For instance, we have a mutual logistics support arrangement, which will build greater interoperability, which I think really goes to this Make in India policy, and will provide a lot of support and sustenance to it. Through this, we are also trying to build, as I mentioned, the complexity of our joint exercises and our bilateral exercises. We welcomed India's P-8 aircraft for an exercise in Darwin recently, and just last week we had an Australian P-8 in Goa. We think that there is certainly many opportunities for us to deepen this relationship in defence industries, information sharing, maritime regional domain awareness, whether it's bilaterally through the Quad, through multiple exercises. The sky is the limit.
Sky's the limit. That's the second time I'm hearing that phrase this evening. And Kunihiko-san, while we're still on the topic of defense cooperation and the fact that you're one of our key Quad partners, Japan is a Vishwa Guru when it comes to making military hardware, whether it's fighter jets, whether it's submarines, battle tanks, but it doesn't export any of these. And it's so strict in monitoring what it exports that I'm told that it does not even sell machinery that can be used to manufacture defense hardware. Do you see this policy changing in our lifetimes? Given the fact that Japan and India share common security threats, do you see Japanese companies being able to sell defense hardware or tie up or collaborate with Indian companies?
Sandy-san, thank you so much. This is also a very interesting and pertinent question. You carefully chose the wording, but here, if there is a misunderstanding among the audience or the Indian listeners, I would like to say that we have the legal framework for the export of our defense equipment as well as technology. Having said that, yes, like Sandy-san said, the conditions are rigid and strict. We don't like to proliferate such equipment, technology to the dangerous, less rigid third country. So for that purpose, we do need the strict rule. But still, the government before already made a cabinet decision which enabled the export of our military, our defense equipment and the technology. In relation to India, this great country, we already concluded the agreement for the transfer of the defense equipment and technology, and we are working on it based on this solid legal framework. Here, in order to be accurate, I would like to quote one sentence from the joint statement made public after the March leaders meeting between the Prime Minister Modi and our Prime Minister Kishida. This joint statement says, I quote, both leaders acknowledged ongoing collaboration in the area of unmanned ground vehicle and robotics and directed their ministers to further identify concrete areas for future cooperation in the area of defense equipment and technology. So this is a written, publicized document under the name of the two leaders, the top level. So our bureaucrats, we have to work in accordance with this document. The process is ongoing. I myself am quite optimistic for our future in this area too. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great to hear that we could finally see Japanese military hardware in India after a very long time. Ambassador Gilon, West Asia was this much vilified part of the world for being unstable and, zone of conflict. And Israel has been at the center of a lot of conflict. You have hostile neighbors on your borders. Until Europe decided to say to you, hold my beer. Now, do you see the focus, the attention of the world now kind of moving away from West Asia and Europe instead becoming that zone of instability and at the shall we say the unstable region of the world, given the kind of powers that are involved there? You have a very large superpower, you have many other countries that are opposed to it. How do you see the next 10 years or 20 years playing out in Europe?
Wow. You asked me the hardest question, because prediction, in Hebrew we say that predictions was not given to the smartest people in the world. If you start predicting, eventually someone will confront you in 10 years with your predictions, and then you wouldn't look that intelligent. But I would say that I think that in Europe what's happening is probably, well, sooner or later will stabilize. I'm not saying finish, because you cannot sustain this war. I mean, the price for Russia, and both for Ukraine and for the rest of the world, in the sense of prices of basic products that are now, rocketing up because of this crisis, I think it will stabilize more or less. Again, not be solved. These things don't have the tendency to be solved. I think that the Middle East is very unstable, still very unstable. It's a changing Middle East, it's a shifting Middle East. Abraham Accords last year might be seen as a stabilizing direction, where UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan also signed peace agreements with Israel and acknowledged the existence of the State of Israel, accepted it. We have connections with other countries. They usually tend to make it also with these countries. We had non-official connections before. And all of that, I think, or a big part of that, is tribute to the fear from Iran. So one of the biggest destabilizing elements of the Middle East today, or the biggest, is Iran by far. The nuclear element is one. Of course, having this regime in Iran with nuclear capability will be a very, very problematic site, I think, for everyone. But even without it, if you look at the region, you can see Iranian destabilization or involvement in almost all the countries. In Iraq, we don't have to mention their involvement in politics through the Shiite. You can see it in Syria, their presence there. You can see it in Lebanon, Hezbollah. You can see it in Sinai, helping former ISIS elements there harass the Egyptians. You can see it in Yemen with the Houthis, and Yemen, of course, is spilling out towards Saudi Arabia, UAE. They shot at them. So wherever you look, the Iranian fingerprints are present, and this is, I think, adhesive element for all the rest, because all the rest are very nervous. So the more the Iranian nuclear program advances, I think that the more people will be nervous in the Middle East. So West Asia, I'm sorry. So I think that we are not heading for quiet waters in the Middle East. I think, again, in Europe, probably it will be relaxed. And I think that Asia is also another region where we will start seeing probably higher and higher tensions once the West, I think, feels that he has its own home front with Russia-Ukraine a little bit put under control.
Storey, I was going to ask you, do you see that the current crisis in Europe taking attention away from Australia's primary security concerns in Asia, given the fact that you have AUKUS, which is this very new formation of two Western countries and Australia, directed at a fourth country? Do you see your Western partners looking away from Asia, taking their eyes off the ball, as they say in cricket, looking towards Europe and not at Asia?
Well, we're all going to keep our eye on the ball, I feel. And I think that the very firm commitment of the Quad leaders very recently to maintain a very close focus on the freedom and prosperity, the openness and inclusivity of the Indo-Pacific shows that we're on the right track. It's only natural that the situation in Europe is going to take a lot of attention. It's going to take a long time to resolve. And as my colleague from Israel has mentioned, there is instability all around the world. So we have to continue to work. The work is not done. It will never be done to ensure that we do strive for this positive and practical cooperation and agenda to ensure that nations in the Indo-Pacific have a genuine choice, that they have the ability to exercise their own sovereignty and freedom regardless of their size. So I'm not too concerned about the gaze of the West looking towards what is going on in Europe. That is natural, but the gaze will continue in the Indo-Pacific, and India, as it becomes increasingly focused on its rise, which is only natural. It will soon be one of the top-tier economies in the world, and it is growing in all endeavours in this 75th anniversary of independence. And India and Australia and partners on this stage and around the world will continue to focus on the Indo-Pacific, I'm confident.
The sky's the limit, the magic words. And Kunihiko-san, my last question, we're almost out of time. I'm going to ask you what I asked Ambassador Gilon this question. I asked him to look into the crystal ball. I'm not sure if there is a Japanese proverb that strikes down people who look into the future, but could you do that for us and see what the next 20, 25 years mean for our countries, especially the Quad countries in Asia?
So, like the Israeli ambassador mentioned, the prediction, this is very, very difficult and dangerous. I don't like to go into this sphere too much, but in any event, I do believe that our precious shared values, such as freedom, democracy, human rights, rules of law, this importance will be kept by Japan in coming, several decades. And on these shared values, we consider the cooperation among the like-minded partners building upon such values. This is very, very important, be it Quad, be it G7. We will continue to work on it. I believe, I recognize that my answer does not suffice to your question, but I would like to stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And my last question to Ms. Storey is actually, when we were talking about the 4 Ds, I suddenly remembered 2 E's as well. And the first E is education, and the second one is the economy. I mean, I know a lot of Indian students go to Australia for education, and of course, the economic ties between India and Australia are picking up as well. So, where do you see the future of that? Again, asking you to look into the crystal ball.
I think we don't really need a crystal ball for that because the evidence is on the table. The diaspora, the Indian diaspora in Australia is our largest growing group. Punjabi is actually the fastest growing language in Australia at the moment.
Of course.
We have, in talking before about security, one thing, I'm glad you asked me that, because what I had wanted to say when I was sitting there afterwards saying, damn, I forgot that. The practical cooperation, it's just words unless I explain what it is. And in terms of striving to make our region more secure and prosperous, Australia and India are focused, with a laser focus, in fact, on initiatives that actually make a difference to our populations, on infrastructure, on scaling up renewable and clean energy, on trying to ensure that we focus on the talent pool, for instance, in India, with critical and emerging tech, something that Israel has done for many years. And we look forward to many initiatives under, for instance, the Economic and Cooperation Trade Agreement, which was finalised by Shri Piyush Goyal and our former Trade Minister. But our new Trade Minister has met Commerce Minister in the margins of Geneva, and they are committed to continuing to negotiate a full agreement this year, which is excellent because it will mean that our inputs into your economy are available more cheaply, which will make India more competitive. Your farmers, your producers, your manufacturers, your service providers will also be able to have your goods come into Australia more cheaply. We will cooperate on critical minerals, on resources, and trying to make more resilient our supply chains, the weaknesses of which became all too apparent during the pandemic. And on education, India is our largest growing market, and the pandemic showed the ingenuity and the innovativeness of our education providers with joint degrees and online facilities. And this is really, we were very pleased to be the first nation that was consulted about the new gazetted laws for these twinning opportunities, and our education institutions, many of which are ranked among the finest in the world, look forward to partnering with yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And while I was on the stage, I just when you were speaking, we were talking a lot of acronyms, Quad and U2, I2. I thought of a new one, JAII, Japan, Australia, India, and Israel. And when you have Japan, Australia, and India on your side, ladies and gentlemen, the sky is the limit. Thank you very much. Thank you for this wonderful discussion.